David Naimon, originally from Colorado, the last 30 years in Oregon. I'm sort of the ugly duckling among this group. I'm the only writer among the visual artists, and we came 3 years ago. And the only reason I'm back is because of the ingenuity that the 4 visual artists did to create this with Sage. So I'm sort of the barnacle or the limpet in the in this endeavor, and graciously they're letting me start the reading. I just finished a manuscript that sort of has an invented genre I call an anti-taxonomy, and it's called Being Beneath an Anti-Taxonomy. And this is a piece from it called 11 Stills, and it begins with, well, it came out, it was solicited for a literary magazine with the theme of journeys, so I had to write something about journeys. So 11 Stills begins with an epigraph from a journal called Global Environmental Change that says, results suggest that the share of the world's population traveling by air in 2018 was 11%, with at most 4% taking international flights. 11 Stills. 1. One of the oldest beings in Europe has stood in the same place for 3,000 to 5,000 years, older than ancient Greece. Legend has it that Pontius Pilate was born beneath its canopy. Wars, plagues, human and natural disasters alike, the Fortingall yew stood stationary and still regardless. That is until this very year, when mysteriously this yew, a male tree, a producer of small cones, a pollinator, decided to be something else, someone else. No longer only a 3,000-year-old he grew some red berries and traveled to sheep. 2. To travel the world, to conquer lands in the name of God and country, to steal goods and make people property, one first needs to uproot trees. One 100-gun ship in Horatio Nelson's 18th century British Navy required 4,000 oak trees, 40 hectares of forest for a single vessel that sailed for nearly 12 years. Nelson's own ship, the HMS Victory, required 6,000 trees, and the Royal Navy entire an estimated 1.2 million high-quality oaks. The Battle of Fort St. Juan, the Battle of Grand Turk, the Siege of Calvi, the Battle of Genoa, the Battle of Hyeres Islands, the Battle of Cape St. Vincent, the assault on Cadiz, the Battle of St. Cruz de Tenerife, the Battle of the Nile, the Siege of Malta, the Battle of Copenhagen, the raid on Bologna. Quote, I have ever been and shall die a firm friend to our present colonial system, declared Nelson, fittingly shot dead, pacing the hardwood deck of the Victory in the Battle of Trafalgar. 3. The yews are not the only beings to reconsider. Orcas have been changing too. In 2020, White Gladys, the matriarch of an Iberian orcapod, exhibited behavior never before witnessed by humans. She circled small yachts and sailboats, rammed them, and ripped away their rudders. White Gladys was pregnant at the time, but shortly after giving birth, in contrast to all known orca behavior, she brought her new calf with her to continue her attacks. Orcas have only a small number of calves in a lifetime, and are thus fiercely protective of them, often teaching them for years before allowing them to venture forth from their shelter. But White Gladys put the stopping of boats before questions of safety or family, and not long after, other orcas began to learn Gladys's techniques. This growing trend is still a mystery to scientists 4 years later. More than 500 boat orca incidents and counting, and now almost entirely carried out by juvenile orcas. Some boats, like the Swiss sailing yacht Champagne, were sunk entire. The consensus advice for you, a fancy person on a fancy boat, if you're attacked by a killer whale, is to stop. Stop your boat and leave the rudder loose. Don't move, don't go, just stop. 4. The word journey at its root has a constraint within it. 1,000 years ago, the old French word journée meant a day's length, or a day's work, or a day's travel. In Middle English, it meant the same thing, both a day and the distance traveled in a day. As recently as 250 years ago, the dawn of the Industrial Revolution still held this sense. Travel was still constrained by the earth and its patterns. Even without movement, even standing still, the day itself has journeyed, and you have too, with it, still. 5. One of the least known no-fly zones in the world, where no plane or drone or other mechanized flight is allowed, is over Malabar Hill in Mumbai, India. Deep within this peacock-filled 54-acre forest lies a tower of silence, and above this tower, the skies are unobstructed by human activity. These circular raised structures have 3 concentric layers and are built in 3 ceremonial phases. The ground is dug up to 11 feet deep, with prayers offered to the angel that guides souls on their journey beyond the body. The laying of the foundation begins with 301 nails driven into the earth, and 1 sturdy thread, which can travel the circumference of the future tower 3 times, is created by the intertwining of 101 fine threads, together threaded as one through the eyelets of the nails. This creates a spiritual web, network, bridge, before the physical structure is made, one that will do the same between earth and sky, body and soul. 6. Each morning, commonly, if mysteriously, vultures stand still in direct sunshine, their backs to the sun, their giant wings spread and held open in what is called a heraldic pose. Some say the word heraldic derives from a mishearing of heraldic. Others say it relates to horal, or by the hour, and still others that it is a nod to the falcon-headed god of Egypt, Horus. Equally unknown is why vultures assume the stationary, sunlit pose each day. There are many theories, from killing parasites in their wings to aiding with digestion. Some birds, like a hummingbird, can go into full torpor at night, dropping their temperature by as much as 50 degrees to conserve energy, making them seem unnaturally still, lifeless, and unresponsive. Vultures go into a mini torpor, and some say the sunbathing pose is a part of their revival each day, the return of life with the return of the day. 7. Towers of Silence, a Zoroastrian tradition many millennia old as as the Fortingall Yew, are sites of excarnation, or sky burial. The corpses of men are placed in the outer circle, of women in the middle circle, and of children in the inner circle, whose axis is a central pit where bones are piled once the bodies have been stripped of their flesh. Vultures are the medium and the means for the soul to journey from its body, arriving to these raised towers at the high point of a hill, towers designed specifically to welcome them, to assist humans as they cross over. The sky above is full, not of humans in planes, but of birds and souls. 8. The oldest form of human art, the cave art of ancient humans, the beginnings of figurative art, rarely depicted humans. And some of this art was not made by humans at all, but by Neanderthals, a species, like so many others, we long presumed were incapable of complex thought or sophisticated belief systems. The oldest known cave art, 44,000 years old, contains therianthropes, creatures that are half animal and half human. Therianthropes hunting warty pigs and dwarf buffalo. To scientists, this suggests that the earliest human art, created by so-called primitive peoples, contained all the key elements of what we consider modern cognition: figuration and narration, the ability for abstract thought and imagination. 9. The science fiction and fantasy writer Ursula K. Le Guin suggests that until very recently, all great literature was imaginative and fantastical, whether the Odyssey, Don Quixote, Beowulf, Hamlet, or the Metamorphoses. That, Realism in fiction is a recent literary invention, not much older than the steam engine and probably related to it. Le Guin also suggests that works of realism move toward anthropocentrism and imaginative literature away. 10. Not long ago in our real world, there were 40 million vultures in the skies of the Indian subcontinent. Today, with a 99% decline, the skies defy augury. The Temple of Silence is now not scattered with cleaned over bones from bird-assisted soul travel, but corpses in various states of putrefaction. Now, far too few vultures exist to release human souls from their bodies, and the increasing smell in the downwind neighborhoods has divided the community on whether to abandon this many millennia-old ritual and in what way. 11. The earth, the water, the air, the ewe, the orca, the vulture, there is no way out but in, they say. You must root down and return to the limits of your body. The language that tethers humans to the earth, Proto-Indo-European, was spoken at the sprouting of the Fortingall Yew during the construction of the first Tower of Silence. The root word, shared by both the word human and the word humus for earth, for soil, was spoken only in this now extinct language. What would a journey to this word look like, sound like? Would we have to assume antlers or look through the eyes of a bird? How would or wouldn't we move? And where wouldn't we go? Thank you.
Thank you. So my name is FrankSheehan. I am one of the blessed gentle artists for this specific residency. I am Irish and I am American, and my work is right behind me here and over here, and it is pretty much all watercolor, except for the pieces that are over here that are oil, traditional oil on panel. These pieces over here behind me were a direct experience of one of the days that Lynn was driving us back during COVID from picking up our groceries from Walmart, because we could place our orders directly into Walmart and they would carry the groceries out to the car for us. But we were driving back and Lynn stopped on the Piney Creek Road to chat with our neighbor, and he was in the process of moving his herd of Black Angus cattle across the Piney Road, and I thought the experience of her just rolling down the window and chatting with her neighbor was such a remembrance for me from being in Ireland and growing up in Ireland and doing exactly the same type of thing. If I spotted a neighbor on the road, I would roll down the window of the car and I would chat with them. So I saw these Black Angus cattle moving across, and as soon as I got back to the residency, I hightailed it back up to the hill with my iPhone, and in panoramic mode, I photographed these extended horizontals of the cattle moving across because they were fluid. They were moving almost like a herd of buffalo across from eastern pastures to the western pastures of this person's ranch. But it was the movement of the beasts that really appealed to me, plus the giant sky in the background that I cannot experience as a resident of New York City. When I walk outside of my house into my garden, I look up and I just see trees. I don't see full sky. And that's the blessing of being at Jentel, is to experience the awesomeness, which to me is an overused term, the awesomeness of the sky and the land together. And what I tend to do here is I tend to fuse both. So long as I have a horizon line, but I will drag the layers from the ground up into the sky and from the sky down. And that's where in these oil pieces I have over here, there's whiplash of Sumi ink on a panel that I see when I'm flying over the United States. I see this whiplash shape in the streams and rivers where the water is finding its own way downhill. And I like the idea of bringing the sky into the land and the land into the sky. I think that's all I have to say, and I will pass it on to Karen Marston. But thank you. But it's going to be a conversation, we will be back and forth.
Yeah. I'm Karen Marston. I grew up in Los Angeles, but I lived in New York for many decades. And as Frank said, we were all here together in 2021. And that's my work on that wall, the really large piece, and the ones on either side of it, and a couple little drawings over here.
I'm Colleen Blackard, and I was in New York as an artist for 10 years. Then I returned home to Austin to pursue my MFA at UT Austin, which I just got. My work is a mix between monotype and drawing and installation to connect external and internal landscapes. Oh, yeah, sure. We'll talk more about it, but mine's the drawing there, and the little monotypes here on this wall and over there.
I'm Amy Robson, and I live in London, England, though I'm originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Been there about 30 years, and I make drawings and paintings and prints and collages and animations sometimes. And my work is about the experience of being in a place, and that could be my lived experience, or it could be, I'm also very interested in how history gets embedded into place. And Jentel, with Nelchi's influence, really ticks the box for both of those things. So I think we're going to talk a little bit about how that experience got really enmeshed in us and then made it into all this work that we're looking at. So I think Colleen's going to start off with some memories from last time. Do you want to?
Actually, Karen's going to tell us about how the show came to be.
You're not going to read?
I will.
Oh, okay. Oh yeah, how the show came about. Yeah, so we're going to talk about how the show came about
How
first.
the show came about. Well, it's an interesting full circle because we got the idea for the show after Jentel Presents from our last residency. We all met here in 2021.
During COVID.
And it was during lockdown, and so we couldn't have a Jentel Presents with a real live audience. We had to do it over Zoom, and there wasn't good enough internet connection at the residency. So we drove into town and we sat around a table in the middle of this room with no audience and just did our Jentel Presents presentations on Zoom to the computer to no one. But so we got to come to Sage and see the gallery and meet the staff. And Jill was so kind on our way out. She said, you know, we're always looking for artists for shows. You guys should all apply for shows here. We have a rolling deadline and we get together a few times a year and look at proposals. And we got out the door and I turned to everyone and said, instead of all of us putting in a proposal and competing with each other, let's put in a proposal for a group show of all of us. Because we all got along so well and enjoyed being on residency together and had so much in common in conversation back and forth in our work and running in and out of each other's studios and up into the hills in the 1,000. And so that's where the idea came from, to have a show together. So it took a couple of years with everyone's schedules to get it on the calendar, and then they were kind enough at Jentel to say, oh, well, if you're coming back to town to have a show, why don't you do another residency too? So we get to have a second residency.
And while I was here, I just was taking a look at this large book, Jentel Memories, that each of the residents fills out at the end of their time here. And I went ahead and read mine, and it seemed like a pretty perfect introduction to the show, so I wanted to share that with you. Really
It's from 2021.
Yeah, this is my entry in 2021. Dear Jentel, I enjoyed so many exciting hikes with fellow residents Karen Marston, Amy Robson, FrankSheehan, and David Naimon. Our sojourn together started with Frank's suggestion to see the sage glow at sunset. It was our first unmasked outdoor adventure together into the 1,000. I painted and sketched with fellow artists Karen Marston and Amy Robson, marveling at our different subjects and focuses within the same landscape. I saw a rainbow atop the first hill in the 1,000 as the storms blew across the bighorns and into the hills. I'll never forget the quiet and the consistent rushing of wind. After his daily run, David suggested we go to a specific hill above the Residency, and Amy and I, and then Karen and I, delighted in the views there. Chasing antelope, I discovered new painting spots around hidden bends. I loved how they would just watch you from atop a distant hill, waiting. So many mule deer and golden eagles, once a bald eagle on a post as well. Amy and I went tubing the first weekend, marveling at how we weren't cold due to the dry air here. She's a force, bright as sunshine, always inspired with her spirit-like drive in the studio and trying new things to create spectacular results. Karen too, with how boldly she created a powerful storm painting in the second week on 10-foot Yupo paper. It was exactly how the weather appeared the day we went painting in the 1,000. And Frank's brilliant colors and vibrant paintings disguise the figure beneath the rich psychedelic hues and pregnant snakes. Always working diligently in the studio, he created an entire series this month. I enjoyed mealtime conversations with David, our sole writer, whose skills as a professional interviewer of authors led to fascinating dialogues and conversations with fellow residents. I attempted to keep up with conversations about interesting books he and Amy discussed, and ended up with a long list of wonderful books to read. I'm humbled by all of their brilliance and delighted to be here. We all bonded over Longmire and Zardos. Highly recommend. I spent a great deal of my own time between adventures and Longmire evenings with mini gummy bears, soaking in the colors, scents, and hills and mountains, fascinated at how the colors from our epic bike ride to Lake de Smet, led by a fearless Amy, ended up in a painting of the hills and storms I saw with Karen. I will always remember the distinct smell and perfume of sage, so similar looking to rosemary, and its jade color against the sandy hills, and the deep blue of Walker Mountain, and Cloud Peak as the clouds rolled over them, and so much more. Warm summer skies, green leaves turning gold, fall air giving way to knee-high snow. 4 seasons and 1 month later, in the snow we say goodbye, for now. So yeah, and then we're going to share different memories.
So I didn't do any of this work here in Wyoming. I did all of this work in my studio when I got back to New York City, but they're all on the extended horizontal and they're all from my iPhone, which I was using a panoramic feature on the iPhone to do very, very careful movements along the horizon line so that the horizon line doesn't appear skewed in my photographs like I see many. These were all done in my studio when I got back. Next.
Here?
Colleen mentioned this one phenomenal day. I mean, every day is different and gorgeous in this space. When I tell people I've been on this residency where they have 1,000 acres of hills for us to wander in and draw and paint from, they're like, 1,000 acres? Yeah. And we got lost a few times. But on this particular day, we just saw this like amazing thundercloud come up over the mountains and over the hills overhead, and I was just really inspired. Well, right before this, I had been, for the last 10 years or so, I've been painting natural disasters. I painted forest fires, which I'm doing again, because it's kind of spooky that a day I landed, the elk fire was happening here. But I painted forest fires and hurricanes and tornadoes and things ever since the BP oil spill. And this place was a turning point for me of seeing just natural weather that was as dramatic and a different sort of side to the idea of the power of nature. That you can't come to this place and see this expanse and this intensity of weather and not feel the power of nature. And so that's kind of the deeper theme of all of my work. And this place is just so stunning and inspiring. This paper is, a lot of people have asked me about the paper. It's called Yupo, and it's a Japanese synthetic paper. No trees were harmed in the making of it. It's completely like some kind of petroleum product. It's super, super smooth, and so it really lends itself to very like fast, spontaneous painting because the paint just moves very quickly across it, and you can wipe it away in a attractive thing and get the white underneath showing through for those really bright highlights. So really enjoyed painting on that. I brought a big roll of it and was just like spread it out as long as I could. The wall, I think it's a good, I don't know, 12 feet long or something, because that was how big the wall was in my beautiful studio.
Cool. Can you do that?
Sure.
So I'm gonna get moving. So you're gonna have to pivot around. So as I was thinking about what to talk about, I was thinking that the experience of Jentel is not just about the space, but it's about the other artists. And Karen and Colleen made their work 3 years ago when they were here, but Frank and I made it more recently. And so I thought, actually, what in my work, and I'm gonna look at each of these 3 pieces, what in my work is a reflection of what I admire with the other artists. So just a bit of background. This is just regular old canvas that you would paint on, but it is unstretched. And what I've done is here I've actually painted with bleach, just household bleach. So as you're painting, so I use Rit dye, like when you make your tie dyes, and then paint with the bleach, but you don't really know what's going to happen. And so for me, it was a completely new experience and an experiment in materials. And I really got that from Frank. And I would say that Frank is a master of material exploration. And with the Yupo ink that the Sumi ink that he's used, I remember him saying, just let the ink tell you what to do. So it's following the material. And I would say that sort of asking the bleach what to do made it into this work from Frank. So thank you, Frank, for that one. Okay. And then moving back over here, is that where I'm moving? Yeah. Moving back over here, I was thinking about this work. This is 1,000 Acres Dream, and this one I would say is related to Colleen's work, and I would say Colleen is an amazing drawer. And she is a keen observer, and you can really see that, particularly in that piece if you look over there. I mean, the attention to detail and her eye is incredible. So the thing about this piece is that actually, when I was at Jentel the first time, I, like Colleen, drew all the time. I went up into the 1,000 Acres and drew all the time. And the hills really got embedded into my mind. This painting actually started out as a swimming pool in Greece, believe it or not. And as I was making it, I realized that the 1,000 Acres snuck in to the swimming pool in Greece. And so the background there is that sort of the craggy hills that you see there. And I attribute that to sort of keen observation and drawing, which I can thank Colleen for. So that's that one. And then over here, I would attribute this one to Karen. And the thing about Karen, and she's referred to it, is that she's an amazing dramatic and gestural mark maker. That's a mouthful, but you can really see how she's very free in her use of material and line and keeps it really fresh. And in this painting, which is Piney Creek Sunrise, it's got a very watery, gestural kind of vibe, which I would say kind of relates to that sort of freshness of mark making. So yes, thank you very much for that one. And yeah, that's my work, and thank you to the other artists.
What about David?
Well, that's going to really put me on the spot.
There's a mystery between
Actually,
visual and
semantic. So actually, that is something that we've been, particularly this month, we've been talking about sort of what are some of the similar issues that we have in terms of content and, as writers, everything's been written before. As visual artists, everything's been done before. And so how do you sort of put the history of what's been done before aside and make it your own? And I think that this, although it's all sort of landscape-ish, we've all made it our own, and I would say that we can thank David for that. Yeah.
Well, alright, so I want to finish up by talking about the work that I have in the show. Inspired by my walks with Amy and Karen and everyone, I just couldn't get over the hills here. I haven't really been around hills. I'm from like the flat plains of Texas, and there's something different about hills than mountains, even they're round. And so when you're walking through them, you think you can see everything because you're on this high height, but then like an antelope would be startled by you as you turn a corner, or some other animal. Like there's so much hidden within the grass, like all around you, you don't know until you cross that. So to understand the hills from these hikes, I wanted to really create this drawing at this life-size scale of my experience to really grasp it. And plus the studios at Jentel are phenomenal. Having this large space to draw on was just a dream come true, so I knew I had to work large with the opportunity I had here. And this one really captured that. I did it in Conte, crayon, and chalk, and just, yeah, wanted to understand it. Also, I was inspired a lot by the stage, like I mentioned before. It was really like nothing I'd seen before, maybe a little like rosemary, but that jade color. And when Frank suggested we go on that sunset hike, that really opened up a lot for me in these monotypes. Like here, and in those there, just that valley full of sage when it would light up at sunset, just with this jade green color, it was like nothing else I'd seen. Yeah, and then also just the skies in Jentel, like this one here, this monotype of Orion over the Snake Hills. That was our view from the Residency, and just such a treasure to see that in the middle of the night. Yeah, so that's all I can think to add about our work. And any other thoughts?
How are we doing for time? Has anybody been timing us?
33 minutes.
So we don't have sage in New York City. We absolutely do not have sage unless they're in some of the fancy gardens on top of Rockefeller Center or something. So I had been here in 2008 and I had seen what happens, the sage, just after sunset, during dusk, just before the light goes down, it goes from the sage green to this blue. It takes on a blue texture. And I mentioned it to everybody. We all went out. We all did some incredible work. The oil on panel piece over there on the bottom was done the same. The photograph that I took was at the same time as this one here. And there's something very strange and odd, excuse me, and awesome about that view. And I need to address the term awesome, which is being really much overused, y'all, in culture. And ice cream to me is not awesome, it's good. A pair of socks is not awesome, it's good. The night sky in Jentel, or the big sky in Jentel, to me is awesome. And that's really, really using the term awesome. It brings to mind to me the concept of the sublime and trying to reflect it in my work. And I'm constantly on the journey of reflecting the sublime in my landscape work. In Ireland, I grew up in a small fishing village, and my parents had a picture window in their, I grew up in the 1960s and 70s in Ireland, and my parents had an American style tract house designed in the probably 50s, built out of concrete in a small fishing village in Ireland, but they put in a big picture window. And I can remember as a child just looking out at these incredible skies that I was able to see, the storms moving through, and looking down on this landscape where there were shipwrecks, and Oliver Cromwell had invaded, and we were looking at the peninsula of the Hook and the Crook, and then the term by hook or by crook comes to mind. I just grew up looking at these incredible skies, which I do not get to see in New York City now. And when I visit the national parks in the States, we get to see awesome, but it takes a couple of days for the eye to adjust to really feeling something and experiencing it. So a 1 day or 2 day visit to a national park is not enough for me at Jentel to be able to just walk out of my studio. I have to stop myself from the detail work I'm doing in the studio and just train my eyes to look up and then twirl around to see the awesomeness of the sky and the land in Jentel. Yes.
Yeah.
Any
So
questions?
I know we have some artists in the audience and various things, so yeah, maybe we can make it more of a discussion. Love to have any questions, even if you don't have a question, maybe just make one up.
Yeah.
Or comments.
I was talking with a lady earlier on about watercolor. She was saying that she is taking a watercolor course, and the one thing I said from teaching watercolor to my students is own your mark and just let it dry. Whether it's a dry mark or a watercolor, or a mark in watercolor, just let it dry and own the mark, is what I'm saying. Any questions at all? Because these questions make us think.
Hi, wonderful presentation, thank you so much, this is really great. I have a lot of art students, and it's really interesting to try to talk to them about what a residency is and why it's important. And I'm assuming you've all been students at some point too, and I was just thinking, like, for their sake, like, what is this residency for you, and how is it important, and how would each of you kind of describe that to something like a student who doesn't quite know yet?
I think there's several different reasons why artists like to go on residencies. There's the concentration and focus that it gives, because once you're out of school, you're not a student anymore, and you have to go to a job every day, and you have all these responsibilities. You have children that take up all of your time. Getting to go to a residency gives you back that focus that you have as a student, where 100% of your time is with no other responsibilities, is to just make art. The other thing it gives you is the community and the relationships, to be in contact with other artists. I'm in a building where I'm my own little space, and I'm the only artist there. And it's really fun to have 3 or 4 other artists around and be able to, like, knock on the door and go, hey, how did your day go? What are you working on? Come see what I did today. And so that dialogue is really fantastic. And the third reason I think people go on residencies, or for me, probably one of the biggest ones, is to get into a different environment, because I live in New York City. I don't get to see this. And my work's very much about environment and place and landscape and sky and all these things that are not super available in Brooklyn. So I really love going somewhere completely new and different when I look for residencies to apply to. I'm like, where is it? What will I get to see there?
David, did you want to add something?
I mean, I guess it would just be reinforcing what Karen said, in the sense that, like, for instance, at home I don't have a writing practice, mainly because my day job, which is interviewing writers, is all-consuming. And so, unless I'm solicited to write something, going to a residency is when I end up either having the time to think about what I want to write or to actually write. Your bills aren't arriving. You're not having to answer other obligations. You're lifted out of your life. And even though my work, I think, is place-based, it isn't usually place-based around where I actually am on a residency. But being lifted out of my life into a new place, I think, is super important for me to push aside everything that's an obligation and foreground something that's not an obligation but a desire.
I would also say there are residencies and there are residencies. And this is a residency. And the thing that is particularly strong about Jentel is that it's absolutely designed 100% from the ground up by an artist, by Nelchi, and her DNA is in literally every single part of it, from the design of the house to the studios to the makeup with visual artists and writers and the communication that happens there. And the other thing that's, because we've all done multiple residencies, all of us, and we tend to talk about it. Day one, and I remember Lynn saying this, and it was like our jaws were on the floor. She said, "Listen, I just want you to know that there are 0 expectations on you as artists and writers. And if you want to go lie on the grass and look at the clouds for the next 30 days, that's absolutely fine. And your studio is your own space. There's no expectation that anybody's coming into it." And hearing that was like, wow. And ironically, of course, it made us work our socks off. You know, we produced a ton of stuff because there were no expectations. And that was very unique to Jentel and very freeing for all of us as artists.
Thanks, Amy. And I want to add, that's such a great question, that it's really important to get to be an artist to show up in the community in that role, especially for someone going from a student to a professional. It's kind of this external validation, and then you're in this space as an artist to make. So speaking from my own experience, that was such an empowering moment to become a resident artist the first time. Also, we've lived in the same city for 10 years, and I never got to connect in the way that we have while we're here. Like, it's a constant sleepover, we're always checking on each other's studios. Karen and I actually showed together in New York, but we didn't really get to become as close friends as we are because of sharing the space together. So artistic community, who do you meet there is really important too.
So to bring it back to the question that was directed, my experience at Jentel, which I have not had at other artist residencies, is the fact of the communal living, the communal studios, the communal knocking on one another's studios and peeking in and being allowed in. That's the first thing. If you don't want any contact, just keep your door closed. But what is for me is the importance of somebody coming in and sitting down and saying, what are you doing? What is this? Somebody that has some type of vocabulary, visual training, that we can identify with one another and take positive, directive criticism as opposed to seeing it as negative or insulting, which we may be experiencing from our friends and family, and definitely from any curators or dealer gallery systems. Not knocking it, but to me, the experience is very similar to being at school and the other artists after the classes during studio time, just coming in and sitting and looking at my work, asking me about my work, but then them seeing other things in my work that resonated with me and that I learn from it and I digest and then regurgitate if necessary. It's the communality of the whole experience.
There was some really nice camaraderie. I really enjoyed getting to know everyone, and Colleen in particular had a lot of interest in going out and drawing and finding the weather and the place and stuff. The first day we went out to draw together, we went up into the hills and we sat down and facing the same direction, and we were both furiously busy in our sketchbooks. And when we were done, we looked at each other's work, and we had drawn the same view. And I had drawn the sky and the clouds, and she had drawn the sage and the rocks and the hills. And together we almost had one drawing. But it was just really interesting to see each of our responses to the place. So for me, a lot about going on residency is responding to the place.
Yeah.
We actually stay in contact with one another between residencies by
And
Zoom.
we got really close. I mean, it's summer camp for grown-ups.
Yeah.
Let's just admit that right now.
Yeah, any other questions?
Yeah, any other questions?
Anything, any comments? Good.
I just wanted to thank you for presenting the world that we live in from your perspective, because I mean, I think most of us appreciate where we live and realize how lucky we are to see these storms every day and to see the lines of the cattle moving over the landscape and to see the sagebrush. But we can also fall into taking it for granted.
Yeah.
And so to actually see it through somebody else's eyes that doesn't live here it's a pure gift. I mean, just somebody that sees the sagebrush and appreciates it so much. And the sky and the cattle, and thank you all very much for that,
Thank you.
for your perspective.
Thank you.
I just have a specific question about this big one here. Tell me what medium it is, and on UPO, I guess, I got that part. But then what blues did you use?
What blues? It's oil paint. I love Prussian blue. I know it's like some people kind of look down their nose at it as a cheap mixed color, but I really like it. I use a lot of Prussian blue, a lot of Payne's gray. I like cerulean. I like ultramarine. I don't think there's ultramarine though in that one.
that your question? The specific types of blues? Because we can go into incredible detail.
That's about, I'm,
Yeah,
yeah,
which one is?
Anthro,
Anthraquinine?
Anthraquinine?
Anthraquinine.
anthracene.
Oh,
She has about 30 blues with her.
I just, yeah, there's a lot of blue in there, but it's primarily probably, Prussian blue, Payne's gray, and maybe some cobalt and cerulean in the later parts.
And U-book paper is shiny. For those of us used to working on grainy watercolor paper that would actually absorb some of the dye that we're using, U-book doesn't at all until it dries, correct? It's
It doesn't
shiny.
absorb, it's a really, really smooth, paper, but it you know, people ask me if it's archival, and I'm like, well, the paper will probably survive the, nuclear holocaust. Will the oil paint still be stuck to it? I don't know. It seems to stick when it's dry,
But it also allows for the wipe,
the swipe.
the swipe and the wipe.
Can it be rolled?
Yes, it was rolled in a tube and shipped here, and it comes in a roll, so it can be rolled.
Just curious, how long does it take for oil paint to dry on you, though? Like, does that give you lots of days to work on this, or?
It gives you a few days, it dry, I don't use the paint super thick, so that helps it dry faster, and, I may have put some alkyd medium in that to help it along.
To help it dry?
To help it dry. I do that sometimes. I don't at home in my studio. I paint with the traditional 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, which is Damar, turpentine, and linseed oil. Since then, like right now, I'm using acrylic. I'm using the Golden Open, which is almost like meeting in the middle of like oil paint with a little bit of alkyd dryer in it, because the Open has retardant in it that keeps it wet longer. So it almost feels like oil paint.
I had a question for Colleen also, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Colleen, what's the surface that you painted on?
Oh, that was drawing paper. It was
It's
a
just
great
drawing paper.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think, did I use any acrylic on the top? I think I did, acrylic white on top, but yeah, the paper's pretty durable.
I have a recollection from this specific piece of when Colleen
Yeah.
finished it
All of us carrying it like giant bed sheets outside.
outside
At night.
because it has to be fixed.
Just
Or
spray
if you
it.
roll it up, it will smudge and you will lose the detail in it. We carried it outside and then we all stepped back because she was spraying fixative, which is acetone, which is highly toxic.
Yeah, you don't want to do that.
We all stepped back, advised her to wear a mask.
Oh, always.
It was in the evening,
It was
I think
night,
at night.
yeah, we had lights on it and everything.
It was out in the car park. We did not spray acetone in the studios. I promise you. But it was a trip getting this giant piece of artwork outside to fix it. And to bring the conversation back to myself, because I haven't talked enough about myself yet. I was years ago, I was making giant charcoal on paper drawings, and the fixative was just affecting my lungs. It's highly toxic, until my husband gave me a Sumi ink set for one of the holidays or birthdays or something, and I discovered I could get the same treatment without having to fix them. Sumi ink dries permanent on the paper, so I'm highly advising to use Sumi ink as opposed to charcoal.
Oh yeah, and that one's Conte instead of charcoal, so it wouldn't smudge.
Right.
That color more.
One of the great things about a residency is having people around you to help you with things like
Yes.
carrying, like these guys all have this like picture of everyone helping me roll and hang that on the wall. Like that's tricky when you're alone in your studio. It's great to have studio mates to help you schlep.
Definitely.
David,
who are you doing?
Well, this is sort of an unsolicited non sequitur probably, but thinking about blue in literature, there's this mystery around the absence of the mention of blue in ancient Western civilization writing. So like, there's a lot of scholarship about why Homer described the sea as wine dark and not blue. And whether Homer, I mean, one whole line of scholarship is that he was colorblind, which most people don't subscribe to necessarily, but there is a mystery around the absence of blue as a written word.
Does it come into literature at the moment that, because there's a point when ultramarine is discovered and invented, added to painting? Does it coincide with that?
Yeah, I don't know.
Chronologically?
That would be a good
Medieval
hypothesis, and Homer was Greek.
So what that means though is that the tubes of color that we are buying in the art store actually have a history that goes back hundreds, if not thousands of years, and that originally, and I know some of this, I know we all know some of this, originally the colors would have, many of them would have come from beetles, ground up, and some of the colors, ultramarine came from the Middle East, I think. All these, the artists that were painting in the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries were spending a small fortune on some of their colors, and then they were mixing some of their colors from found materials in their environment.
We can talk about color forever.
We can. Oh, I have another.
If anyone wants to ask a question, has
One
some
more.
quickies.
In 2008, I was working with white on top of one of my canvases, and I was going, why is the layer underneath coming through until both Colleen and Karen came into my studio and they said, what white are you using? And I said, I'm using zinc white. And they said, oh, zinc white is transparent, whereas flake white is not transparent. They're 5 or 6 different.
Titanium.
It helps to have experts.
Jill,
within
did you have a
range.
question?
I did, yeah. I loved hearing kind of your response of like what it was to be in a residency. And I do remember some of the artwork that you had when you guys were first here, and then seeing what came about from that. What, being at the artist residency, working with each other, how has that changed or influenced your work that's come after this? Not just this work, but your other bodies of work.
This marked a turn for me of doing kind of pure, dramatic, big landscapes. Like, I had always had a practice of doing plein air landscape painting in the summer, which I started doing never intending to show anyone. It was almost like a journal keeping or like a practice activity. Like, I learned to paint the clouds, and then I went into my studio to my disaster series, and it helped me paint smoke or something. And a couple friends a long time before that said, you know, you should do your landscapes big. I'm like, nah, it's not, you know. And it wasn't until I came here that it was like, oh, landscapes have to be huge. And after this, I went to residency in Newfoundland, which is also another like big dramatic landscape with the ocean and the cliffs. And it was really interesting because I grew up in Southern California looking at the ocean, and when I came here, I kept the endless rows of hills remind me of the ocean, that type of expanse. And so seeing this landscape and doing this big piece was a turning point in my work, and that I started centering the landscape without a specific disaster, just in itself, and letting it, you know, and be the drama in the really big landscape.
I will say that working at this scale was really exciting, just to have that wall and to create a piece that felt like you could step into it. The work that I just completed for my MFA show was actually along those lines. It was a landscape you could walk into. So having that experiential element of the drawing, I did these large monotypes that were 11 feet tall in bales that you could walk through and navigate a forest. That really kind of started with this piece, so thanks.
And actually, 3 years ago, limitation and actually a screw up really helped my work move on. I sent from London big, huge rolls of canvas because I typically work big on canvas, and BA lost the rolls, and literally I never got them for the whole entire 4 weeks.
British Airways.
Yeah, British Airways, yeah. And as a result, I had to work small, so I had to work on, you know, A4, I guess in this country you call it letter paper, anyway, we call it A4. Anyway, I had to work small, and I did a series of monotypes, and it had to have been influenced by Colleen, and it was a massive series of monotypes that I'd never done before, and they were really fresh, and they were repetitive, and so clearly that all influenced the monotypes, and they were great, and in fact they're gone. So they sold them, so I couldn't show them this time because they're out in the world. But it's a great example with artists. When you have a limitation, limitations can be the strength. So yeah, that was my experience.
You have something to add as a writer?
I can if you want.
Yeah.
How the experiences affected your work?
Just like it's difficult, I think, when Amy was put on the spot to talk about an influence of a writer on a visual artist. There's the mysteries. I mean, I would argue that we share similar questions about representation, and we all have an engagement with the natural world. Beyond that, it's hard for me to speak to like how a painting that I'm not directly engaging with is entering or not influencing my narrative or whatever I'm writing. So I guess it's more oblique and mysterious, and our camaraderie around puzzling out how to represent it would be a more vague way I would say that it affected me.
Good.
Are we close?
We should tie it up.
Do we have a minute to talk about my parents' picture window?
You mentioned already, clean out the picture window.
Same picture window in Ireland. I was able to see as a 7-year-old with binoculars Jackie Kennedy visiting Ireland after her husband was shot, and I had stood in front of him and shook hands with him 3 months beforehand as a 7-year-old. And then I got through my parents' picture window to see Jackie come with the 2 kids to Ireland after he was murdered. And I would see her horseback riding through my parents' binoculars. They would have to drag me away from the picture window and there's a connection here. to go to school. So big picture is really what took me out of making portraits of Jackie Kennedy, which is what I was doing here in 2021. And pregnant snakes, because snakes petrify me. But it took, looking at the work that people were doing at the same time, pulled me out of the detailed work I was doing out into the landscape to look at the big picture. And this is the type of work that happened afterwards. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it did pull me out of the studio. And Jentel does not insist on our doing any specific type of work at the residency. There are no rules as to what we do in our studio.
What's your project, what are you going to do?
You can just put it in here.
Okay.
Thank you all. Thank you. Thank the residents for being here and for sharing in this content, in this context. It's really kind of a different, fresh way to see this. So thank you for coming back as a cohort. It's been a pleasure. Jill and Rachel and the small one. Yes, thank you as well for putting a bug in their ear and having that come around.
It's an honor to have you back in the studio with the gallery here.
All right.
Thank you all for coming.